It's my pleasure to help out and share my taxonomical leanings, right? I actually have stopped working on fish for many years, right? Not because they're no fun, but because, a person only has 24 hours a day, so we have to choose, right? But when I was younger and more energetic, I was not that smart, so I played with both crabs and fish, right? That being said, it was good fun. So for today, let's get the talk started. I'm quite happy to share my taxonomic journeys with all you folks. Rajiv has rounded up a very large cadre of different taxonomists from around the world. I've seen the list. It's a very impressive list from around the world, over 30 countries. And well, what I'll do is I'll start my talk by sharing one of these jokes, as I call it, which I usually start my classes on taxonomy with. In the science of taxonomy, we give names to living things. And we give names because this is what we would like them to be called for our convenience. So let's get started. Okay, I'm going to share with you my experiences of being a taxonomist, right? I will try to reiterate my point is that to be a taxonomist is nothing to be shy about, because we are in a profession that has been lambasted by a lot of people. So let's talk a bit about this, all right? So the challenge, of course, is when Rajiv asked me to give a presentation, my idea was, what on earth do I tell my fellow taxonomists? All of you have been working on fish. Many of you have been doing it for a long time. I've read your papers. I've seen your citations and your nice works on different groups of fish from around the world. I'm still sort of a small busybody, so I do read the fish papers when they come out. So what can I possibly share with the community that you don't already know or have not already experienced? So perhaps it's more like a sharing session than a lecture. Of course, all of you know, because for those of you which have practiced taxonomy for a few years, the first accusation, the first unpleasant thing that you've been called is that you are no more than a stamp collector. Sometimes they'll call you a glorified bird watcher, right? You are just doing this, it's no different from a hobbyist, right? And therefore, you do not deserve this moniker of being called a scientist, because taxonomy is not a science. After all, stamp collecting is not a science. It's just a pastime. And of course, these are not very nice terms they call us. And in fact, in all my years of taxonomist, I remember on many occasions I've been told by older colleagues, senior colleagues, older colleagues that, Peter, maybe you shouldn't call yourself a taxonomist. That is such a bad term, an old-fashioned term, an obsolete term. You should call yourself a systematic biologist, or call yourself a phylogeneticist, or some other high-sounding name that just doesn't use this ancient term called taxonomy, which gives you a bad name. Well, actually, I disagree, right? Because the people who ask me to change my nomenclature is not that my science is bad or my science is not a science, is that they just have a misunderstanding of what we actually do. So, as I said, I'm happy to be a taxonomist, even proud. We have to ask ourselves in this business these days, we would like to think of ourselves as a top scientist, right? We believe our taxonomy is a science. It's an important science. But yet the world we are living in is unfortunately a world which is defined by parameters and KPIs that taxonomy doesn't really fit in completely. For those of you which are in top research or big research institutes from universities or academia, almost all of you will be compelled to play what I call the academic game. If any of you have been in this business for a few years, you'll know that there's always a pressure to publish, and not just publish, right? Publish more. You need to publish in the best journals, like these two famous journals on the left-hand side. You need to publish in journals with very high impact. You need to play the game because you need to publish in topics which are current and relevant. That means they have a quick turnover, what we call a fast half-life, because this means that you'll be highly cited. So this is where you play your H factor, you play your Google Scholar to try to get as many citations as you can. And if you play all these games very well, you are then called a top scientist. and your universities and your institutes get ranked higher. There's also a push that science must be practical, right? Even here in my own university, very often we have been charged that we have to do science that delivers products to people as fast as possible. You have to get more patents. You have to make money. And you must make managers happy, either through money or through rankings or through other some sort of metrics that makes the organization look good so that you can compete at the global level. You will hear this word benchmark. All these must come in, right? And in the context of all these parameters, taxonomy ranks very low. There are very few journals focusing on taxonomy that are above the lowest 10-20% of the Science Citation Index or the Web of Science or any other index you choose. Taxonomy and the taxonomic data that comes out from papers is also generally not useful in the short term. Many good papers are cited usually 10, 15 years after they are published. So we cannot have a fast half-life. Citations take time. If you want to be a taxonomist, unfortunately, as many of you will know, as I know, you will neither be famous or rich. And this is why, in many ways, the universities and the academic institutions make us feel bad in many ways. I would argue, in fact, I won't argue, I will state that taxonomy is a science. It is not a modern science. It's a foundational science. It's a foundational science that follows all the same principles of science that make it an important discipline. People think that, oh, all you guys do is just give a name to an animal. Anybody can do that, right? No different from collecting a nice stamp, a rare stamp, a unique stamp. Well, unfortunately for my detractors, the science of taxonomy is much more than that, right? There is a process, and the process follows scientific principles. As you can see, what I call my mission 1, 2, and 3, right? And it's a circular story. We discover animals. We find strange and rare fish. We set a hypothesis because we think it's different. We think it's the same. We think it's interesting. And part of the process of the hypothesis is to give it a name. This is no different from coming up with a mathematical theory and giving it a name. All hypotheses, theorems, and other things that in other disciplines in science are given names. Well, in our case, we have a formal structure to name our animals after we have discovered them, after we have done all the due diligence to show that they are a different species or subspecies or a different family. But that's all part of the scientific process. And after you find a name, the next step is usually to work with colleagues to try to better understand the animal and see the context of how this species fits into its ecosystem, for example. And as you do this, of course, when you go to mission 3, more questions will arise. Then you get more confused because more factors come in. And you may find that 2 species has been lumped into one. There's a species complex. There's a cryptic species problem, and so on. And you go back to mission 1 and you start it again. Now, if I show this table to most of my scientific colleagues in any of the disciplines, none of them would need to be convinced that taxonomy is a scientific discipline, no different than the others. I must admit, it is very old, right? Because we all follow principles established by Linnaeus 200 over years ago. So yes, we are old, but that doesn't mean we are bad. And that does not mean at all we are not science, are not a science. So I am in full belief that taxonomy is an important science. But there is a big difference. Compared to my colleagues in the labs, which are really doing what I call high impact science, right? In which they're looking at literature, looking at discoveries that have a half-life of 5 to 10 years. Our taxonomic science, unfortunately, has to go all the way back to Linnaeus, and sometimes even older. I always tell my colleagues and my students, to be a good taxonomist, You also have to be a pretty good historian, an excellent detective. You have to master languages. You need to understand the law. And these days, especially, learn to be more of a politician as well, to navigate the complex landscape that we have been given. Many of the sciences today do not have to be so complicated. I have a friend who works in mathematics, and they tell me, I don't need to know too many languages. Why? Anything that was published 100 years ago in German, I don't have to worry about German, right? My science is current. Current means 10 years. You don't have to worry about anything beyond that. Well, they are lucky. We are not. And I'm sometimes happy to be unlucky because it means I learn a lot more as well. Yes, we are talking about names. One of the pleasures and outputs of our science is giving names to animals. And I don't think we need to be apologetic about it, all right? For those of you on the screen, you are looking right now, one of my old friends there, right? Maurice from Switzerland, right? The fact that I got playing with fish is all thanks to him. He got me interested to play with fish. When I first went out with him 40 years ago, 30 over years ago, right? I was chasing crabs, he was chasing fish. Of course, both of us were killing animals for our own selfish reasons, but we were excited to discover interesting animals that we are curious. And when we do taxonomy of animals, we give names once we are sure our hypothesis is correct. And that's what being a taxonomist is all about. I asked a few questions, and these questions have been asked of me many times over the years, as asked of you guys many times over the years. Why bother? So you say it's a science. It's a low impact science. Why do you want to still do it? Anyway, who cares what the name of an animal is anyway? It doesn't matter. I can call it A, B, or C. What's the fuss with whether it's named A or B? So what if we are not sure this is species A or B? It doesn't affect my life in a big deal. It's not a COVID curing drug. It is not a magic bullet. It's not a new biomaterial that can make me $1 million. So who cares if it's new? Why do we need to know all these animals, all these fish are new species or different species anyway? How does it help our economy? Does it make the country richer? Does it matter that Rajiv finds 3 more snakeheads from Kerala? So how does it help the economy? It doesn't. Well, my experience, and many of yours the same, tells you that scientific names and associated with it, taxonomic stability in names is a very powerful tool when you're writing papers, doing studies on ecology, systematics and phylogeny, when you are going to implement conservation practices. You need to develop management routines and policies. And if you're involved in fisheries or aquarium trade and so on, even economics. The name is the starting point in which you start the exercise. It's like selling a product, no different from the market forces. Whether you're selling a bottle of shampoo or you're selling an aquarium fish, the product needs a name for which you can sell and for which you can manage, right? And that name has legal consequences, economic consequences. And who creates these names? We do, based on scientific principles. Names provide stability and usability. The community will have to use it. Yes, many names are not used except by scientists working on fish. But that doesn't change the fact that they may be useful down the road, and many of them will prove to be useful down the road. I reiterate, taxonomic names have a legal value across many domains, and especially in conservation. And my experience in many taxonomists is they are also conservationists because they believe that conserving animals are important. Anyway, just as a sideline, many of these pictures of nice, colorful fish here are not taken by me. I'm a good killer. I'm not very good at taking pictures. Most of them are taken by my ex-student Hyok Hui and colleagues who are always kind to share with me nice pictures of fish. They do look nicer when they are alive, but I don't have the patience to photograph them. Anyway, names have a legal value. I emphasize, you cannot conserve what you do not know. You can't tell people that here's a rare fighting fish, and people ask you, so what is the fighting fish? No, that red one, no, that colorful one, the big one swimming in the water. This one's from Brunei. Yes. So which one are you talking about? The red one lah, the red one with the black chin. You can't do that. You need a name. The name then goes into legal statutes, into laws and gazettes that will protect the animal, manage its export. That name has legal consequences. For those of you who know the story of the arowana, this is arguably the most expensive freshwater aquarium fish in the world for the moment, right? It is important that the name that is on the CITES formats and trade forms is Chirophagus formosus. And when the taxonomy is not done well, when the taxonomy is carelessly performed, this creates confusion in the community, and bigger still, worse still, it creates confusion for managers. How do you conserve the fish? How do you protect the fish? How do you set laws for overfishing and illegal export? Bad science, bad taxonomy has consequences. So this has to be done well. At the end of the day, of course, the taxonomy can be tested against different tools and we will be able to sort out the mess. But this is where I emphasize, good taxonomy, careful taxonomy is extremely important. These days, in the landscape that we're working in, I will also advise many of my colleagues from around the world, fish especially, right? You will have to navigate a landscape which is full of laws, regulations, stipulations that you can't do A, can't do B, right? I know Biju himself, one of the co-organizers of this, is giving a talk about Indian laws, right? And he will share with you India's perspective. But it's not just India, it's the world, right? All of you will be familiar with the fact that we have the CBD, which is supposed to be a series of laws that countries sign on that will help conservation and help conserving biodiversity. I'm not really convinced. You have the new Kyoto Protocol, which is in practice by many countries. And all these laws which have come into place are supposed to help conserve biodiversity. As I said, I don't really agree. But since I'm not a politician, I can't do very much except deal with laws and rules as they come up. The rules are supposed to be good for our science. Unfortunately, the rules in most cases have made taxonomists' lives very, very difficult. Too many rules to follow. And for us taxonomists, which are working on big stories, in the old days when I was younger, I could work on fighting fish from 5-6 countries quite easily because the rules were easy to navigate and the rules were easy to fill up and just move on to the next step, right? These days, if you want to do a study of fish from 5-6 countries, I will tell you, think twice, think thrice, maybe even not, because the permits will give you a lot of work. Unfortunately, as I even spoke to the CBD lawyers many years ago, many lawyers do not really understand what taxonomists do. So we, as taxonomists, will have to engage with politicians and policymakers much more, right? Those few I've spoken to, the lawyers from around the world, even first world countries like Europe, what they tell me from what they understand of taxonomy scares the life out of me. The best one is, oh, you guys just take a book, decide what it is, and give it a name. Simple, what? Really? Yes. And if it's not in a book, it's a new species. Ah. Well, it takes a long while to explain to them that the process is much more complicated than that. So for all of you, I think one of the advices I'll give to think about is that you all will have learned, all have to learn to be good politicians in some way, because the socio-political landscape we're living in today is very complex, right? I know many of you will argue that the rules are stupid. I concur. But we are not in a position to fight them. I give you this example. You're wondering why I show this picture of a wasp. Because when this wasp was published, right, a lot of Indonesian politicians jumped up and down complaining that the animal has been stolen from Indonesia, right? This is a wasp that should be described by Indonesian scientists, should be letting Indonesian scientists do all the work. Why are Western scientists claiming all the credit for, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth, right? And sometimes it's not easy to explain to politicians who read something or hear something and then get very excited. What CBD and the Kyoto Protocol and so on have done over the years, unfortunately, is to create what I call a false sense of nationalism. And unfortunately, science tends to work across borders. Science these days is most effective across borders, but not easy to navigate. There are a few points I want to toss for the community to think about, just to think about, right? And this reflects from my own many years of experience being a taxonomist. I have done reasonably successful as a taxonomist. I have continued chasing my fish and my crabs especially, and I've done reasonably well in the university and the community. But part of the success, I suppose, and my ability to survive is that you need to adapt and fit into the niches when it's available. Taxonomists, I would argue, when you can, need to grow out. I didn't say grow up, I said grow out. We need to grow out of the fact that we are just mere discoverers of species or describe species or name new taxa, right? We need to grow beyond just people who build the infrastructure. I'll tell you why, right? We need to be part of bigger stories. I'll give you a few examples. This is a science paper published several years ago by a whole bunch of folks, right? You might recognize two names, myself, together with Rohan, who's somewhere in there with me, right? And this was a paper conceptualized by several of us, right? About Sri Lanka and its connections to India, right? And this is a paper that involves data that Rohan had on fish, data that Rohan and I put together on crabs and shrimps. And this was an idea brought in by some people to say, oh, we want to look at what's the connectivity, the biogeographical connectivity between Sri Lanka and southern India. Now, there are two ways we could have done this. We could have worked with the biogeographers, like this paper, join forces, analyze the data carefully. Rohan and I are not good biogeographers in the sense, looking at graphs, geology, crunching algorithms, but we know our animals. We join forces with them, and voila, we come up with a very nice, I think, a paper on Sri Lankan endemism and Western Ghats. He participated as co-scientist, and when this paper came out in 2004, of course, we all shared the credits. Now, there's a tendency these days sometimes when we join forces or when we discover our species, we're happy to describe a species, revise the genus, and then when there's something interesting like biogeography or perhaps phylogeny or something bigger, many taxonomists tend to step one step back. Oh, I just deal with the species. Let others handle the big picture things because I'm not so good in it. That is not a good idea. I've seen a lot of good papers in the last few years, right? Even in my own university, papers written by some professors in which they're not domain experts. They don't know the animals that are being analyzed, but they are very good at analysis, what I call meta-analysis, getting data together in big algorithms and complex models, and they can publish in the top journals. The data comes from the taxonomists who discover the species, who get sidelined. And when the big papers come out, the analysts are credited to be the experts, and they get all the attention, which is patently unfair. This is a paper we wrote in Frontier some years ago, right? And one of the things we did was we got our botanists together with the fish people, as you can see, Hyok Hui is there, right? To work together with the modelers to understand how peatlands loss affects species loss, right? I was telling our guys, make sure the taxonomists are deeply involved so they can tell you the fishes a bit better. And then when the paper comes out, of course, everybody shares in the credit, right? There is a big push these days to see big patterns. And this is where the modelers are strong. The highest impact papers are all in those domains. The taxonomists must, should, and get involved. Because I think also it makes for a far, far better paper overall. Another point to ponder, all of you know that we're living in an age of super technologies, right? These new technologies make for very, very exciting times. I won't go through all of them, but as you know, right, these days, to do taxonomy compared to even 20 years ago, we're such a privileged group. We have international travel, internet, email. new imaging tools, and the new imaging tools are coming in once every few years. Some of the new tools blow my brains, so to speak, when I see the kind of images they give me, right? No longer stencil pen, we have computer drawing tools, and the genetic technology, the molecular technologies on the table are scary. I carry all the literature on crabs in a small hard drive, which I can put in my pocket. No longer do I need to carry all the books around. I used to remember publishing a paper usually involves a 1-year wait time, and that is fast. Now we measure publication in weeks. These technologies allow us to work across the globe faster than ever before. International collaborations and communications means that we can actually do very powerful science. And I think more of us should jump onto this and learn technologies that make things go faster. My third, and arguably, and this will be the last point, right? Taxonomists are sometimes just seen as people that give names and no more. I vehemently disagree. One thing about taxonomists is that they are crazy people. You search for the animals. In your case, our case, we search for fish. We find strange fish. We want to know what they are. We chase them, we hunt them, we find out what they are, we study variation, we try to find out what the structures are for, we try to understand what the fish are doing. Now, bigger science is very often what I call seeing the light. And big science sometimes is about asking the right question. In the last few years, because of all my running around chasing crabs, fish, and all those kind of strange animals, I've been in a position to actually talk to a lot of very good scientists, modelers inclusive, and we can actually provide them with very good questions, very good questions that they can test. Why? Because we taxonomists can do the one thing that many modelers or data crunchers or conservation biologists can't do very well sometimes. Because we hunt our animals, we actually know our animals very well. We know what are some of the interesting questions that the animals pose to us because we are curious, but we may not necessarily have the tools to answer those questions. We see two fish, similar behavior or similar color patterns. Do they have the same behavior? We see strange structures that we do not know what the purpose are for. We say strange biomaterials that we are curious about. So in many ways, if taxonomists actually collaborate more with scientists from other disciplines, biologists from other disciplines, there's a lot of room for collaborations. And many of my most interesting papers actually have come from tie-ups with colleagues in different fields. Some of my bigger papers, which I've written, actually have been tie-ups with people with skill sets for which I'm poor at. For example, biogeography, even DNA tools, all right? I am not good with chemicals, but they are. But at the end of the day, I do know my animals, and I can propel the scientific argument and the paper towards much more interesting conclusions. So therefore, we are in a good position to actually participate in some very cool papers and stories. And that's how we can, in a way, increase our standing, I suppose, in academic departments that value too much KPIs and high impact papers. That's the value add, and I don't think we should be shy about it. We are living in interesting times, not just because of technology. This was one of the mantras I throw at my students and colleagues very often. The question we're asking is not how much we know. It's not even how much we don't know. And we actually do not know a heck of a lot, right? The interesting thing in all my years of chasing crabs and fish and other animals is what scares me and also excites me is that very often I find things that I did not even believe could exist. You find animals in places that they're not supposed to be there. And when you do find them, they look so strange and bizarre or against all the rules that you just get excited. This sense of discovering things that you cannot even imagine. It's what's the fun in our science. And it's also a way to engage more members of the biological community to do even more cool science. So being a taxonomist gives us all these opportunities, and we shouldn't be shy about it. Thank you very much.